Melanie Ansley. So I'm very happy that you're here today, and I'd like to thank you so much for joining us.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to start off with a few questions. Now, I'm not going to bombard you, don't worry. So we're going to start off with your, background and work experience first. So could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I've had quite a varied experience and roundabout route, I think, to getting to authordom. But I started out in film and TV, actually, and I still do film. So producer and writer. And I've always been interested in storytelling, so I think that this is part of that segue into that. I grew up in China for most of my life. And so I actually didn't learn English until I was about 8, learned to read and write English, that is, until I was about 8 or 9. And so I went to Chinese school for quite a bit of my childhood. So I was speaking and reading Chinese mostly. And then I started doing, after I graduated from university, I started doing film and TV in China. And obviously this involved telling lots of stories and putting together stories and finding stories. So I guess stories have always been in my blood, and I've always loved reading. So it's been really great to kind of marry those two things, storytelling and my Chinese background, to do my latest series.
That's amazing to hear. Actually, that segues right into the next question I was gonna ask you. So on writing and inspiration, growing up across cities like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taipei, and Beijing, how did how did your multicultural upbringing influence your storytelling and choice of genres?
I think that I think it had a big influence, moving around and being in places that might not be the usual for some people. For Western audiences, I think had a big impact on me, and also moving around. I mean, I was mostly within Chinese cultures, but even within those Chinese cultures, they were very different. Taiwan's very different from China, very different from Hong Kong. And traveling in Southeast Asia, I think, exposed me to a lot of different cultures. So I've always been really interested in just how other people live and their histories and their stories and their legends. From everything from Arthurian legends to Asian legends to stories that we tell as myths. These sorts of things, and what you find in museums and art has always been
Yeah.
a really big influence on me. And so I think I always, whenever I went to museums or art galleries, I would always imagine the stories that were behind, the art pieces or the paintings, the sculptures, or even temples or visiting ancient sites. I always found it really fascinating to try and imagine what that would be like, in their heyday. So I think that the same, happened when I read books about Tang China and also was visiting places in China, right?
Yeah.
Imagining what it would be like in those days was really heady for me and very exciting.
Oh, that's great. So, what inspired you to write dark fantasy, and what about the genre allows you to explore themes like self-acceptance and courage?
I think fantasy is a really interesting genre in that it's fantastical, obviously, but in that weird kind of roundabout way, it allows us to explore truths that
Yeah.
maybe we can't really look at directly. We're too scared or we're too awkward to look at directly, and so we create these fantasy realms where we can then explore it safely. In a similar way, I think it's amazing. It doesn't really change from when we're kids, right? And we have animal stories, that allow
Yeah.
us to safely, or Hansel and Gretel. I mean, there are so many horribly dark stories that we tell children, and that we've heard as children.
Yeah.
But they're basically about, beware strangers and all these things, and life doesn't always go according to what you like, and there are some bad things in the world, and they get told to us through, these sort of parables or these kind of stories that are kind of safe, or they're made safer for us. And so I think that dark fantasy kind of offers that a little bit, that it's not the real world, but we're going to explore probably very, very real things, because that's what we know, right?
Mhm.
It's the world all around us, but we're exploring it in that different way. So I think that's partly what draws me to it, and also um the sheer scope of imagination, I think, that you can bring to fantasy worlds, I think is just very, very fun. And I've always liked that sandbox and loved imagining different worlds and not being too bound by, the realities that we find ourselves in, obviously.
Yeah. I guess like being in that like different diverse environment and having all these different legends and cultures influence you really does broaden like your imagination for that. I would find like you wouldn't
I think it
be
does. I think travel is one of travel is one of my favorite things, just because it exposes you to so much, and new ideas and new concepts, and the fact that other people can think completely differently from how you think, is really inspiring.
So, how do you balance your roles as a producer, screenwriter, and author? Do these creative outlets feed into one another, or do you find sometimes that it's conflicted?
I think it can be conflicted. It's a very different part of the brain, I think, that the two sides use. So a producer brain can be very different from a purely author brain or a purely storyteller brain. But that said, being an indie author, I think I benefit from my producer background, I think, because then I can put on a producer's hat a little bit more and sort of look at the business side of things and look at the practical side of things, and see things from that viewpoint, and not be, and if I can say so, not be so precious about what I write, because I look at it as being, well, I've got to satisfy myself, but I've also got to make sure that it's appealing to other people as well, and that it finds an audience, and that it can survive on its own. So I think producing has taught me a lot in that respect. So I do think that the two feed each other. I'm really grateful for my producing side of me, to help out with the more creative, head in the clouds type of author side.
Yeah. Speaking of the storytelling aspect, is the process different? Like the storytelling process different, or is it kind of similar?
To script writing, you mean?
Yeah, to script writing.
Uh, that's a good question. I mean, obviously the writing and that process is so different. I think the sheer mass of words in a novel obviously makes it very different. It's a different, it's like a race, right? It's like a sprint versus a marathon, I guess. And in some ways, a novel can be a bit like a marathon, and a screenplay can be a bit like a sprint. But I think that's also what makes screenwriting so interesting, I think, is that because you do not have room for the number of words that you have in a novel, you have to be extremely disciplined and extremely spare in screenwriting, which is a great skill to have too, because I mean it makes you show, don't tell. That just becomes so important, right? And it gets drilled into you as a screenwriter, and so you can carry that over into your novel writing, to a certain extent. That okay, I definitely will do more of showing and not telling, right?
Yeah.
Which is great. But yeah, in that way, I think that the process is a little bit different. You got to pace yourself, right? The writing is kind of different. You sort of, I mean, there might be screenwriters out there that say they write 5 pages a day, and maybe that's how they pace themselves. I know that for novelists, a lot of people will do whatever, 2,000, 4,000, whatever words a day, and do it that way. I don't know whether screenwriters do the exact same pacing, but that process I think might be different, or at least for me anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's like good, amazing to hear, because I've never spoken to anybody who's like a scriptwriter or producer before as well. So it's always fascinating, because storytelling in all its forms is very it's a very like um interesting process, and it's very intricate and it's very personal. I guess like from being an author, it's very solitary, whereas I guess like
Right.
producing and screenwriting, you're surrounded by different people and teams who influence the story as well. So like seeing what it is like behind the scenes and how that's like for you as an author is very fascinating.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. It's kind of two extremes, right? In filmmaking, there's all these people, and you cannot make this by yourself. And not to say that authors can write a book by themselves, because obviously there's a team of editors and people. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's much more solitary, and you can bring it to a certain you can bring it to a certain standard and a certain phase without having a massive team of people around you, unlike filmmaking.
Yeah. Has that ever been like something that, I guess, like in screenwriting as well, and filmmaking, you get to cut a lot of stuff. You only keep the important stuff important to the narrative. Whereas like with a novel, like it's like at the editing stages, I've talked to a lot of authors who are just, when it comes to editing or cutting things, they're just so stressed out. They don't know what to cut.
Yeah, I think and I get it. And I think that I think that that's also an advantage of screenwriting. Is that you just chuck out huge parts of it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you change it. And I've actually found through the process that I now underwrite. So I actually get the bones out, and it's very sparse, and I get out something like a 70,000 word manuscript. And then when I give it to beta readers, they say, oh, but I need to know more about this, and I need to know more about that, and I need to understand where this is coming from. And so I end up adding another 30,000 words and having to find, oh, okay, this is how I need to flesh out the story and get it out. Because I think, and that might be partly a screenwriting leftover, in that I'm only going to just do the bones, and then I find out that I have to flesh it out, and I need to explain more, otherwise the pieces don't connect. So I think that's more of my process, and I think it allows you, I think, yes, and being part of the editing process in filmmaking as well, I think allows you to be very brutal with cutting, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and it's not serving you. So get rid of it. And your goal is the final piece. So and I mean, and in filmmaking, it's even worse, because that's after you've spent a lot of money making the thing. In novels, all you've done is it's your time and your sweat. You sat down and you've written it, right? But if you throw that out, it's not like you're looking at $30,000 down the toilet, let's say, cutting a scene from a film. But you just have to be that brutal, and just check it out. So for me, getting rid of pages in a book is oh, that's nothing. That cost me 4 hours. That's fine.
Well, there's a lot of authors who'd love to have that as a super secret writing talent, because we all struggle so much when it comes to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And not to say that I'm not attached to certain scenes, but like if I get feedback that's just like, no, that's just not working, then it's just after a couple of times of getting that, I might mourn it for a little bit, but then there comes a time where it's like, right, yeah, all right, it's gone. Dead to me.
Like I used to, when I was writing, I used to like always, like when it came time to cut and I didn't know what to cut, I would always like put it on the side and be like, I'll come back to it. And then like a year or two later, I'm like, why was I so sad about that?
Exactly.
Like I'm not even gonna use it. I've put it on the side. It's like doing nothing.
But I think that's a really good method, because if you can't bear to part with it, and I can't remember, somebody else had that method as well, but you just put it aside and you say, well, if it's really great, I'll come back to it and I'll bring it back in. And that, and then that you haven't like deleted it off your hard drive. It's still there if you ever want to come back to it, but you've removed it, and you can see that the thing still works, and maybe works better.
So speaking about, your publishing journey, what was it like getting into, first of all, deciding that you want to, publish, and then deciding on your journey, like either hybrid, traditional, or indie publishing? What was that process like for you, and what was that experience like for you?
It was, I started with some queries for my first series, Book of Theo, and I submitted it, and I got some really very nice rejection letters back. And they pointed out to me a lot of flaws in less flaws and more just marketing, marketing challenges for the book. So at that point, I kind of had two options. could shelve it or change it, or I could self-publish it. And I decided on self-publishing, partly because I also felt that I'm quite a learner by doing. And so through the doing and through the self-publishing, I came to really understand what the publishers or what the agents had been telling me. Basically, I understood on a deeper level what they meant. So in that sense, I actually learned a lot through that. Otherwise, I would have just taken their word for it and gone ahead. But I didn't understand fully what they meant by the marketing challenges of this type of book. So in going through it, I learned a lot, and I was really glad that I did. And then after that, I think, to be honest, Dragon Class probably could be traditionally published, just in terms of, forget about quality of work or whatever, but just in terms of its plot and the timing now. But I think partially because I do work in film, and it's such a collaborative and such a how do I put it? It's got a lot of gatekeepers. Filmmaking has a lot of gatekeepers. And so working in that, I'd gotten a bit frustrated, I think, with, projects getting to a certain point and then, not being able to get them forward because basically nobody wants to take risks. And, that's understandable. It's a lot of money that's going on the line for films. So in a way, this was a freedom that I could have to do things where I didn't have to go through those hurdles. I could publish it. I could let people tell me whether they liked it or not, and get it out onto market and let the readers tell me, is it good? Is it bad? But at least they're telling me, and it's not, trying to convince several roomfuls of people, that this is worth doing. And especially when it's actually so economical, to do self-publishing as compared to filmmaking.
Your stories often highlight the power of art. How do you define art and its role in challenging societal norms or inspiring change?
Wow, that's a deep question. Let me see if I can come up with a deep answer. What makes life worthwhile in a sense? It's and it's always been through art. I think that we've been able to communicate the deeper part of ourselves, I guess, and that lasts time. It's one of the things that also lasts through time. Like, we can still look at statues from 2000 BC, and we're still looking at art, and also its reflection of human emotions, and the human condition doesn't change as well, which is incredible. And I always find that, if I'm in a rut, if I go to a museum, or if I go watch a movie, or if I read a book, I find that that's always what brings me back out. And even with my children, I teach them my method of calming down, or kind of, balancing my emotions, is actually to read a book. So these things are just, I think, so important to us, and especially now more than ever.
Yeah. So you touched on your first book, which was Theo, and the Forbidden Language. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions about that. So Theo and the Forbidden Language won Best YA at the 2018 Indie Readers Discovery Awards. What inspired the story, and how did you feel about its reception?
The story started when I was very young, actually. In my teens, I just had this idea of a rabbit, who needed to go and save animal kind, because language was forbidden. And I think I just imagined a world where what would we do if we didn't if we were banned from reading and writing, which to me is a kind of hell. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on a podcast, but but something like that would be, would just be this horrible situation. And it also, it also made me examine the idea that actually, that's one of the major differences between animals and humans, right? One can read and write, and one has communicable language, and one doesn't. And the power of that is really quite incredible, I think, to me. And so I wanted to explore that, and I wanted to explore, what happened, what if there was a world, way back when all of us could speak, or all of us could read and write, and what would that be like, and how would we treat animals differently if they could. Was kind of what I was exploring in that. And yeah, it's in terms of its reception, I was really glad to, and really honored to have that award. That was really great, and I went to New York for it, which was really fun. And yeah, it got good reviews, and I'm still friends with a lot of the people that reviewed it and received it well. So I'm really happy to have written that trilogy.
Oh, that's amazing. So do you see, like, from that point, from publishing, your first book, to now that you've written so many, do you see a change in your writing style, or your process?
Absolutely, yes. I don't take as long, for starters. The first trilogy took me a long time. And I think I agonized over everything. I mean, I still, and that's not to say that I don't, go over everything with a fine tooth comb now, but it's just that I think I know where to focus, and I think I know my strengths more. And I know a little bit more about my process as well, and trusting it. So it used to be that I would doubt everything about my process. And there's lots of wisdom about how you should write and how you should outline, and that you should, anything from writing every day to, well, you have to do 3-act structure and plot everything out, and use cards and blah blah blah. And I thought there was something wrong with me, because I didn't really, it didn't seem to work for me, I guess. And so in going to my next series, I kind of abandoned that and sort of said, well, I've written 3 books. And this process that I've been doing so far does really seem to be a struggle for me. What if I just let that all go and kind of naturally just looked at what I want to do, to write a book, and see what happens then? And I did, and it was extremely freeing. And I then trusted the process, and and now it's the draft that I have, first is just really terrible and awful, and it's a vomit draft, but that's how I work. And then through it, once I read over it, that's when it becomes, oh, okay, I know where to go, and it naturally kind of falls into the act structure and whatnot, even though I haven't laid out, very clear grid marks basically for it. And I can sort of stuff and move it back in. So I would say that my process has become a lot more intuitive. And there's been a lot more trust. So I think that's good, because I've stopped fighting myself, I think, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and it resonates with me, because, like, I think a lot of, like, writers and aspiring authors will resonate with what you said, because I think we all have that moment sometime in our, like, after we've written our first book, or, like, our first series, that we're like, hold on, this is not working for me, but everybody says it's supposed to be working for me. And
That's right.
and you go through the conflicting space where you have to be like, okay, like, I need to find my own process.
Exactly. Which is both easier and harder, because the thing is, you want the magic bullet, right? You want to try them out, and like take one and have it work, and then it's like, oh, now I'm just going to churn out books. And the thing is, it isn't. You just have to find the one that's right for you, and that's even harder, right? Because then it's not a trial and error of like other people's tried stuff. It's actually, no, you just got to find the magic one for you.
Which is, like, I think it's just like a milestone everybody has to go through, but it's like kind of jarring, because sometimes you feel like inadequate, like, I should be able to do this, like, I don't know.
But yeah, there's no should, or, well, I mean, it's just whatever works for you and what gets you to the end line. So which was also another thing that I realized. It was very helpful for me kind of let go of where I started with the vomit draft of where I started with the book, and say it doesn't matter where I start, and it doesn't matter how bad it is at the beginning. It's just about where it ends up. And that kind of helps through a lot of block and a lot of hesitation and a lot of, staring at the blank page.
Speaking of the challenges that you faced, while you were writing, Theo and the Forbidden Language, you talked about that you queried in the beginning, that book series. So what would you advise other, writers to do regarding that querying stage? Because a lot of writers, they find that when they query, sometimes they don't hear back, or that they experience a lot of what you experience, which is like that it's just a marketing thing, or they get a lot of feedback on like, this is not currently what the genre is selling. This is not what's, popular right now. So it's less to do about the actual book that you've written and the things that you've put into it, and more to do with the current market and I guess like the agent that you're querying or the publisher that you're querying, if they carry or if they represent that book or, the series that you're writing under the genre, what you're writing, if that makes sense. So like, what would you advise people to, first of all, get through that part, and then second of all, like move forward from that part?
Yeah, I didn't have a very long time querying, so I wouldn't say that I'm, an expert in it, but I think that it's very important to try and make a decision about what you're after in the publishing journey, I think. So with traditional publishing, I think, and with an agent, there are so many wonderful things that come with it. And but it is hard. The querying stage is a waiting game. It's a limbo game that you kind of have to psychologically and emotionally prepare for, and financially, I guess, prepare for. But if you keep going, 90 letters or whatever, or 100 letters, I mean, it's a numbers game. And the good news is that actually there are so many agents and so many publishers that it does take a while for you to run out of doors to knock on, basically. So, you really can just keep going as long as you've got the time. So I think that if that's the way that you're going to go, I think, above all, you need patience. You definitely need patience and faith, that it will get there. But on the other hand, if everybody's saying that there's a marketing problem, then, that's also something to think about in terms of, well, then do you want to shelve it? Because, basically, if you keep going and you get that reply several times, then there's probably something to what they've said. I mean, I know that I now know that the agents who are kindly telling me that Theo and the Forbidden Language was hard to market were correct. I just didn't understand at the time. So if that's the case, then, it might be worth looking at, well, do I put this in a drawer until a different time? Because, hopefully your publishing career is very long and you're going to write many books. And just because it doesn't get published now doesn't mean that it won't get published later, or that the market doesn't shift, right? And then, so I think the patience and the keep writing, I think, is probably the best advice one can give, but, well, obviously taking care of your mental health.
Yeah.
Because querying can be very draining mentally.
Yeah. I actually resonated with what you said, and found it fascinating previously when you said that the film industry is a very closed door industry. And I think like that also applies to publishing as well. It's very gate kept. And I feel like both film and publishing, you have to be strong and be able to take rejection well. Sometimes it's not even like about you. You just have to be mentally prepared, basically. Yeah, like you said.
I mean, rejection is the name of the game is just such an understatement, I think, for both industries.
Yeah. So we're gonna move on to on Riders of Jade and Fire. Riders of Jade and Fire series is set in Tang, China. What drew you to this historical setting, and how do you incorporate historical accuracy into a fantasy narrative?
So I've always been fascinated by Tang China because it was kind of the golden age, the Renaissance
Mhm.
of China. It was a time of great peace and prosperity. It was also the time of the only female emperor of China,
Mhm.
which is the time where
Yeah.
it's set. So the Empress Wu was the only, actually, we should call her Emperor Wu because she made herself emperor, not just empress. But this time period was just always considered a golden age in China, and it was a melting pot, which spoke to me because I think that in my years growing up in Beijing, which is one of my favorite cities, it was a melting pot for a lot of people from all over the world. It was kind of a boom era. This is in the 2000s, early 2000s in China. Um, and there were people from all walks of life in Beijing, and that's kind of what made it really interesting. So in a way, I see parallels with Tang China. So I was really fascinated by this time because also women had more freedoms. They could play polo, they could walk around the streets in men's clothing. So they enjoyed freedoms that they didn't have for centuries after that. So I think that was what drew me to it. And in terms of incorporating historical accuracy, I love the historical research, but I also have a rule that I try not to overwhelm the story with it. And I also try to give myself free rein to change a little bit of the history if I need to, if it serves the story, or if it doesn't, if it drags down the narrative, basically. So I do give myself some license.
Speaking of like Empress Wu, Emperor Wu, she was like a badass. Like she is so inspirational.
Was.
Like she literally was so like cutthroat. She even killed her own son, like to retain power. Like I just find like history so, oh my gosh, I just love that you like went there because it's so fascinating, and a lot of people don't know about it. You wouldn't know about it if you weren't like a historical fanatic like I am. So
Oh, you are great.
yeah. So when you were doing like the research and stuff like that, obviously you had like an advantage because obviously you speak the language and everything like that. Did you like what was the process like when you were researching all of that and then putting it into your story?
So I do my research a little bit differently, I think, from other people. Other people do all of their research all at once, and just go really, really deep. And I mean, I grew up reading a lot of historical novels,
Mm-hmm.
and loving historical novels. So I had a little bit of background in it already, or a sort of familiarity with the time period, just also from watching TV shows in China, historical dramas and whatnot. So in this one, I would research as I wrote, partly because I would get rid of scenes in the editing phase, and so
Yeah.
I wouldn't need it, or I would come across something and I'd say, oh, you know what, it would be great to set a scene in this part of town, in the Persian area, let's say, because as part of my research, I found out that in the capital there was a Persian district that was complete with a temple and its own stalls and vendors, and it was the area that sold all Persian stuff and foods, and things like that. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. Let's set something there. And so and then I would research all the different things of what was the temple like, and who went there, what was the population, and how is the city divided. So as I wrote, and had the scenes come in, I would research. Um, and yeah, it's been continues to be an amazing journey. I'm discovering lots as I go along.
So what tools did you implement for writing your characters or developing your characters?
um I did use Pinterest a lot, in terms of just coming up with visuals that would be
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah.
And also now, I mean, there's also a lot of online resources for like how the Tang Dynasty people dressed. And
Yeah.
there's instruction videos for basically how they put their clothes on, and how they made soap and all this kind of thing. So it's been really great, finding other people who are really enthusiastic about that, because then I can actually watch these videos of how these things work and kind of have a little bit of historical accuracy to it. So I would say that I did that, and then there's also a mix of real characters in there, right? There's Empress Wu, and there's a couple of other real characters or people that are based on historical figures. So I would do a bit of research into them as well, and just take some of the facts, and then, as I said, give myself a little bit of license to be a bit free with them, but probably keep the basis of that person.
So your main character, Jin, is a very complex and layered character. Would you tell us a bit about how, what inspired you to write her, and if, something that surprised you about that character when you were writing her?
Gosh, a lot of things did. So I just had an image when I was thinking of Tang Dynasty. I just had an image of somebody of mixed heritage, basically. So like myself,
Yeah.
because I hadn't seen much of that. And I knew that they existed. A lot of them existed in Tang China because there were lots of foreigners, or what Chinese call foreigners. There were lots of people from other countries that came into China and married and settled down and had children. So it wasn't that uncommon, but I'd never seen it before in literature. And I thought, well, why not me? Because I'm half Chinese and half Canadian, Caucasian Canadian. So why? And I grew up in China, so why don't I write about that? So I started with that, and she just kind of grew from there. And just in terms of her, and she did surprise me in like what she wanted and liked and what she really feared. And I think she has parts that I recognize in myself, but then also other parts that I think she's just completely made up along the way.
So dragons play a significant role in the series. How did you approach creating their mythology and integrating it with Chinese culture? Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. And my dragons are a little bit different in that I decided to go with inherently Western dragons in a Chinese tongue setting. I think because traditionally Chinese dragons are actually not warlike, really. They're about peace and harmony, and a lot of stories about. I mean, there are some stories about them where they're aggressive, but really it's more that they are bringers of rain and peace and harmony and balance, right? They're good creatures. And I knew from the get-go that I like writing action fantasy, and that there was going to be blood, and there was going to be war, and there was going to be battles. And so I thought, all right, I'm going to just meld things that I like from East and West, and I felt like I had a unique license to do this, or I felt like I gave myself unique license to do this because I'm half and half, and I'm this mix of both sides, and and it's random what parts of me are Chinese and what parts of me are Caucasian, to make up what I am. I just thought, well, I'm not going to follow any sort of rules about, this all has to be Chinese, or this all has to be Caucasian, or this all has to be, one or the other. I'm actually going to just mesh it together and create my own intersections of this, which I thought was really exciting and really cool. And I think drove me in the whole writing process was I liked that freedom. That just as I myself have made, something new out of the two cultures, I think that, the books kind of decide to take their own path in terms of merging Western dragons, with a very real Tang China setting and certain real Chinese characters.
So obviously in, the Night of the Black Dragon, Jin starts like a turf war inadvertently. She does that by accident. So when you were putting together this conflict, and obviously with the dragon riders and them being like their kind of own class of elite people and having their own culture and customs, how did you incorporate all of this to make the main conflict?
Do you mean in terms of how to boil it down to like one conflict?
Yeah.
Yeah, the short story was a challenge, because obviously when you've got a short story, you need to fit, a lot into something short, but without overwhelm, I guess. And I needed to set up, what comes later in the first book, I guess. So it was more of a background, just trying to supply a bit of idea of her character and where she's coming from and why she gets to the point that she does when we meet her in the first book.
So it was kind of like a bit of like her history.
Right. Yeah. And seeing her, yes, and seeing her reasoning so that when you get to the first book, you understand why that first heist is so important to her, why she has to do that heist.
Okay. So we're going to move on to Dragon Flames. So Dragon Flames dives deeper into Jin's story at the first, as the first female dragon rider in the Tang Empire. How did you approach her development in this book, especially as she grapples with her new labels and her forbidden bond with Reishan?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, obviously every book has to grow and deepen and kind of dig deeper, and so that was good because I could flesh out a little bit more, things that haunt her and also this new ability. So in the second book, she finds out what Reishan's ability is, and how that affects her. And obviously everybody's expecting, when we think of powers and gifts, we think of things that are really, really good, but in this case, it's something that is unexpected, and different with her. And I think that's something that drives a lot of the books, is just how unexpected things happen to her, which I find is the same as what life is. You just never get what you expect, right? And basically how that changes her, and how she reacts to it and how she uses it, is all part of that delving deeper into that mythos and into that story.
So the concept of blood bonding with a dragon is fascinating. What inspired this idea, and how does it shape the relationships between riders and their dragons in the series?
I think the blood bonding, yeah, I'm glad you find it fascinating. I think the blood bonding aspect, comes from the idea of, obviously deeper than just a regular bond. It's something like a commitment, basically, that where you and somebody else, in this case a dragon, share something that's so profound that you kind of lose a little bit, possibly, of where you end and the other begins, right? And it's something that connects you. I think that we're always very fascinated. I mean, from even love stories are just about our fascination with, a very deep connection with somebody, and different kinds of connections. And so I thought it'd be interesting to explore that in this, where, Reishan gives up a bit of himself for her. Not to give too much away, but he does give up some of himself for her, and they have this bond that, as they're going to find out, is both a blessing and a curse. So it gives them great power, but it also results in different things, as that can be very dangerous for them, and means that other people can hurt them a lot more, than if they weren't blood bonded.
Well, I guess that shows a level of vulnerability as well. I mean, we can't have our characters be invincible, so I like that it's like a level of vulnerability, and something that is both a strength and a weakness to them as a pair, especially as like the main, protagonist and everything like that. I just find it like really fascinating and like special as well, because it's like two sides of like the same coin kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you're absolutely spot on, that it's interesting in these books where you have characters that are very, very strong. You run into the danger of having them not be vulnerable or not have weaknesses, and obviously you need to have that. And so, yes, hopefully Jin still has that, and she's going to continue to have more of that as she goes.
So how does Dragon Flame expand on the themes of breaking taboos and challenging societal norms established in the dragon class?
I think that her power that manifests is something that, takes everybody back. So I think she manifests late. So basically, there's 5 different types of dragons, right? And each one has already a set type of power that they will manifest, except for a jade dragon. Basically, jade dragons are the wild card, and they manifest late, which causes Rayshan and Jin no amount of stress. And when they manifest, it's something that you have no idea what it's going to be. Again, speaking to the unpredictability of life. And so when she does realize what this power is, it's a double-edged sword, basically, because it is both very powerful, but it's also something that is not necessarily widely accepted, and something quite taboo. Right? It's
Yeah.
something that most people would look at and say that is not natural, and that is not on, and we don't want any part of that. And as the series goes along, I think I'll be exploring more of how that power is this kind of double-edged sword. So you get something, but you also have to give up something. Everything comes with a price, and whether you want to pay it, that's the other question.
So in Dragonflame, Jin faces Bai Clan, the Empire's most feared dragon, and uncovers an insidious plot. How did you craft the suspense and stakes in this storyline?
Well, I knew that from the beginning. I think that I wanted to make sure that there was a twist at the beginning. I didn't want it to be too predictable in terms of how it went along. So I think that having the beginning where she's facing off with Baikalan, but not in the way that she expects, because she does uncover betrayal within the ranks, that then ends up nearly killing her. Was something that I thought I would put early in the book, which is also another story trick, right? Start late, leave early.
So
I tried to do that as much as possible.
Oh, okay. So Rayshan manifests a dark and rare power in this book. Can you share more about this, his role in the story, and what his power symbolizes?
Good question. His role in this story, I mean, he's both a wise dragon to her, and a steadying force for her. And their fates are very intertwined. As I said, they've got this bond, right? That's going to shape her life for the rest of whether she likes it or not. And the same goes for him. So I think that the two of them together are kind of a symbol of love and what it means to be committed to another person, and to always be there for another person. I think is very integral to them. And in terms of his dark power, I think it's really about life and loss, and what it means to die and cross to the other side. Is it really a final crossing, or is it not? And what does happen to life force after death? Does it really disappear, or is it possible to come back together? And what is that line? So I think he's a big explanation. He's a big exploration, of death and life and meaning.
What do you hope readers take away from Jin's struggles and triumphs in this installment?
First of all, I hope they're entertained, because I think stories are there to entertain. But I also hope that they take away some of what she learns in the book, which is, I think, about the true meaning of living, and striving for something above you that maybe you didn't think was possible. Because Jin's problem when she first begins hugely is that she doesn't want to struggle against her lot. She's trying to stay safe. She never steals from royalty. And then as she goes along, she realizes that she can be something more. and she has to choose whether she does that. And she realizes that riding on Rayshawn or being a dragon rider is true living, and so she decides to fight for it. So I think there's lots of themes in there that I hope people take away about living your true life and fighting for it.
Yeah. So crafting dragons, we've already covered a little bit about how you design the hierarchy and the culture, what influenced that, and the abilities of dragons like Rayshawn and Bai Clan. Do you have anything else to add, like culture-wise, when you were crafting these different cultures? How did you distinguish them from each other?
Are you talking about the dragon cultures and the Chinese cultures, or Chinese and foreign cultures?
All the cultures, because
Right.
you are influenced a lot by different cultures. How do you make sure you distinguish them when you're interpreting them into your books?
I guess I do a little bit of research for that for the different cultures. I mean, dragons obviously I've made up, but I did a lot of research into Persian culture as well, because there's Aiden is a Persian character, and there were lots of Persians in Tang Dynasty China. So and I have some friends who have knowledge of that culture, so I would consult them as well, and keep that. But yeah, I do try to keep that in mind when I'm differentiating the cultures. Also, Aiden, I think, to me is interesting too, and actually many of the characters are like this, because I think that they come from different cultures, but they grew up in China, so they're not necessarily one culture. They're more like, I guess I relate them to my own third culture upbringing, in terms of that you might be from one culture but you've grown up in another culture, and that makes you actually this kind of interesting hybrid of the two. You're not necessarily purely one or the other. You look one way, but you actually have different customs that maybe are not from your homeland, right? And so I think that I also try to differentiate them in terms of the person that they are. So not necessarily that they're completely one culture or another, but that they are who they are, and they're influenced by how they were brought up, if that makes sense.
So the series has been compared to Dragon Riders of Pern. Were you influenced by Anne McCaffey's work? And how do you distinguish your dragons from others?
I definitely really enjoyed Dragon Riders of Pern, and I read a few of her books when I was growing up, and I think that my dragons are different in that I tried to marry some Chinese aspects with Western aspects. So that's why the dragons in my story still have elemental influences, right? So there's the black dragons can manipulate air, bronze dragons can change their sizes, gold dragons can manipulate metal, and so on. And jade dragons are a wild card. And this came from Chinese tradition of the idea that there'd be harmony, and that dragons would have a connection to the elements, basically. So I think in that sense, it's a bit different from other dragon lore. They're not gold hoarders. They're not, they're quite separate. I think they might look like Western dragons, act like Western dragons, but there's a certain amount of the Western dragon lore that they don't really follow. So I think in that sense they're different. And also, I mean, Anne McCaffrey's books were so unique in that they blended sci-fi with dragons, which is still something that I don't see much of, really.
Yeah. So on the writing process and fan reception, Dragon Class received glowing praise, with readers unable to put it down. Did this reception shape how you approached writing Dragonflame?
Yes, absolutely, because it was great to see what people responded to and what they liked, and to try and use those in the new book to give people more of what they wanted. Definitely, it was really good to see what people enjoyed and what they wanted more of. And so I tried to think how I could do that organically without sacrificing the story, obviously.
So what challenges did you face in creating Dragonflame and how did you overcome them?
It was a much longer book than I
Mhm.
originally intended. Again, because I underwrite, and then beta readers were sort of saying like, well, what about this? And I don't understand that, and whatnot. So it took a little longer than I expected, but I've also learned to trust that process as well. That you can't you can't just say it's going to take a week and it takes a week. It often it everything takes longer than you expect it to. And I'm still learning how to plan around that. But anyway, I'll let you know if I figure that out. But but yeah, it was much longer, and it was also about how much to reveal and when, because there's still so much to come in the other books. It was just making sure to give people what enough information that they would be satisfied, but not overstuff a book because it was already quite long, really, in my opinion. I know it's not a Brandon Sanderson book, obviously, but in my opinion, it was quite long. It was longer than usual.
Um, is that something that you want to do in the future? Writing a long book like that, or was that something that just surprised you during the writing process that you're not too keen on doing again?
No, I think that I think a story is as long as it's supposed to be, right? So
Yeah.
it's as long as it takes for you to tell it. I don't know if I can imagine myself now, especially given my screenwriting background and whatnot, of doing a 200,000 word book. I don't see that in my future, but never say never, right? You just never know. But I generally keep it to about 100 and under.
I wish I had that talent. I am an overwriter.
No, but I mean, look at fantasy writers. They all write really long books, and it's great for KU. The longer the book you write, the better it is for earnings in KU. So don't fight it.
So, you've built a loyal fan base for the writers of Jade and Fire series. What has been the most rewarding feedback from readers so far?
I think one thing that somebody said was that the books are just getting better,
Oh,
and I think that's, in some ways, that's the best one can ask for,
mhm.
because that's why we're all doing it, right? We want to
Yeah.
become better writers, and the fact that this reader has been with me since Theo, and is enjoying the books and keeps enjoying the books, I think is fantastic.
Oh, that's amazing. So future and themes. So Jin's story resonates with the themes of courage, defiance, and self-discovery. How do you think these themes will evolve in the series moving forward?
They will definitely evolve. I think that it's all about digging deeper. So more courage, more adversity, more of things turning out to not be what Jin expects.
Can you share any hints about what's next for Jin, Rayshawn, and the Tang Empire?
Definitely more twists, lots of surprises and reveals.
Um, are there any spin-offs or, companion books or additional stories in this world that you'd like to explore more of?
Absolutely. Actually, I just finished writing a short story that's going to be in an anthology of short
Mhm.
stories with several other amazing writers,
Yeah.
including, actually, coincidentally, Todd McCaffrey,
Mhm.
who's the son of Anne McCaffrey,
Oh,
and
wow.
who now writes Dragon Riders of Pern. So I just wrote a short story for that anthology, and it's set in the same world, but 900 years before. So it's set in the Qin dynasty,
Mhm.
basically during the time of the first emperor. So another very ruthless ruler. He's the one who built the Great Wall and was an absolute dictator. So as you can see, I'm quite drawn to characters that are ruthless.
I love that. I do love a ruthless character who's flawed. It's like lovely
Same.
to see like how they got to that point.
Exactly. Yeah, and trying to see the humanity. I think I'm fascinated by what makes them the way they are, what makes them tick.
Yeah. Um, so we're gonna move on to some questions about like publishing. how do you navigate the balance between, your personal expression in writing and leaving a bit of yourself behind? So, we talked about how um, writing is a very solitary
Mm.
endeavor. Is there like, when you're writing your books, do you find that you are having a solitary experience, or do you have like people, you talked about beta readers and stuff like that? What's the process in that?
In terms of how much of myself I put into the story and how much I leave behind, I don't put in. Um, I think that I've found that a story is much better if I put a lot of myself into it.
Hmm.
I think I used to try to hold back because I felt like it would be corrupted somehow by having too much of my thoughts or feelings in it. But actually, I think I've come to the other side now. I think that actually that's what gives it heart and gives it its signature, basically, and its reality, because it's authenticity. Because basically, if you're putting your own feelings into it, I think that it shows.
Hmm.
So at least at the edit, at least at the writing stage, I actually try to let myself put as much of myself in as possible. And it's only if a beta reader comes back and says this part doesn't ring true, or this part seems cheesy, or whatever it is. And I do ask people that. That's something I ask in particular, is tell me if anything's cheesy. And if they say something along that lines, then I'll take it out. But so far, I'm not sure that that's really happened. I think I suffer from holding back too much, withholding too much, because I'm generally reserved.
So, which character do you relate to the most, and why?
That's a really tough question. I guess because I'm writing mostly from Jin's view, I relate quite a bit to her. But I also realize that I relate a lot to Aiden as well, because he's a Persian, having grown up in China, which is kind of akin to myself. I was always seen as an other growing up in China, so I can kind of understand that perspective. So in a way, a lot of the characters, even the villains, have a bit of myself in them, or
Hmm.
a bit of myself that I can understand in them.
Hmm. So what was the biggest lesson you learned while writing these books?
I think to trust my process
What
was
was,
a very valuable lesson.
yeah, I think like, I think that's like really great because, sometimes like as writers, especially if you've never done it before and it's something that you're stepping into and, you're kind of new to it, you always second guess yourself. I've spoken to like a lot of authors who, even like if their story's already published and they're like out there, they would still go back and like change them if they could. But it's like really important to like you said, trust your process. And I think it's like a I don't know, it could be like therapeutic in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think that everybody's going to want to go back and change their story. I don't think that that changes. Trusting your process doesn't mean that you write a perfect masterpiece. It just, but you do write the book, and you put out you put out the best that you can do. That doesn't change the fact that in 5 years you're going to look back and say, "Oh my God, I would totally rewrite this," because I think that's just human nature. That's just what we do with all of our art. You know.
So being in film as you are, is there like any what's like your fan casting for your book, your
Oh,
characters? Jin.
wow. Yeah, that's tough, because it's actually not that many, I guess, in that age group. Gosh, good question. I mean, Gong Li would make a great Empress Wu. Um, but in terms of Aiden and Tai and Jin, gosh, I'd have to think about that one. You stumped me. Because I think also part of what drew me to this story is actually that it's quite different characters from what we generally see. So I don't have an immediate go-to point for it.
what advice would you give to aspiring writers?
I would definitely say find your process and trust your process and be patient.
So, which character was the hardest to write?
I think, it's interesting. Most people say that villains are hard to write, but I find my villains are probably the easiest. In some ways, I think Jin was actually the hardest to write because Jin, like me, is reserved, I think, and doesn't really express herself necessarily. And so I think that in doing the writing, that would come up time and again with my editors and with beta readers is, well, what is she feeling and what is she going through, and you need to give us a little more insight, into her. So I think that because she was the main character and because there were lots of things that I was drawing on my own feelings for with her, it became a little bit hard to really open up, because I myself do not, I don't open up all that easily. And so I think for her it was a bit hard to write, whereas the villain, I felt, I feel very comfortable writing villains.
Why is that? Why do you feel comfortable writing villains?
I don't know. I think it's because I try to see the logic in what they do. And I think once I see the logic and I understand that they don't have necessarily my same view of right or wrong, then I think it becomes easier somehow. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Like, I also like writing villains. I
Oh,
find
yeah?
that, yeah, I find that, like, a flawed individual is just like, I don't know, it's just like so fascinating, especially from like a therapeutical aspect. I feel
Yes.
like sometimes, what I don't know, like what fascinated me about becoming a writer is that, when you write your protagonist, what makes them make, the right decision all the time. Like they do struggle as individuals to make that choice. And we see that that struggle of like right and wrong, of them going through their trials. But at the end of the day, they always, triumphant over what they've been struggling with. So like with a villain, to see somebody who doesn't get to that point and just turns the other way and goes down a path that you yourself wouldn't go down is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's lots of people that don't make the choices that you do. And to be honest, I mean, and I look at it and I don't see it as being my choices, as being, oh, how good or how right I am. I see it a lot as being luck and just a different mentality. Maybe I have the luxury of making those choices, whereas somebody else doesn't have the luxury of making those choices, right? So it's also much more understandable from that perspective. I find it's easier to see things from what we would consider a villain's point of view, if we try to look at it that way.
Speaking about reviews, so how do you handle negative reviews or criticism?
I mean, I read them, but I don't. I think everything has negative reviews. You're not going to please everybody.
Yeah.
And I will look through them and see, do they have a point? And if I feel that they have a point, then I'll think, oh, that's kind of interesting, and I'll go and see if there's something I can do about it. But the other thing too is just that you're never going to please everybody, and so bad reviews are just part of the course. Some people like it, some people don't, and that's completely fine. I don't like half of the books that person probably loves, but that's okay. That's just taste, and it's what makes the world interesting.
So, moving on to your editing process, have you had your book professionally edited, and how did that go? How did you go about that, the editing process regarding, indie publishing?
So I did have it professionally edited. I hope it shows.
It does.
Sometimes you wonder where these questions are coming from. But yeah, I did, and I've been, and that's also a trial and error. You find people that work, well with you, or whose editing style that you like, and who you feel, do good points. So I think that's also just experience, and by doing it, I don't worry about people changing the voice or anything like that, at all.
So we talked about, the difference between film and publishing. What is the timeline for publishing, and how did you find that different from the timeline for, film and production?
Well, the average independent film takes about 7 years to get off the ground.
Mm.
So, and if you're fairly efficient about it, the independent book, even by a long term, takes about a year, right? A lot of people are writing 12 books a year. Not that I can do that, but lots of authors can write 1 or 2 books a year. So it's a vastly different timeline. Vastly. And I mean, that just has so many knock-on effects on the type of project and how you make it, and things you have to consider.
So what's like the biggest pitfall that you experienced while publishing that you wish you knew before you started?
That's a really good question too. I think marketing. I think for independent publishing, the amount of marketing, the amount of the number of jars that you need to kind of keep your fingers in, is really quite immense. And now I'm starting to scale back. I'm starting to take advice about, just pick and choose the things that, feel right to you and that work for you, and just stick to that. Don't try to do everything. And I think that's very, very good advice. But that said, in the beginning, you kind of have to try everything to know, right? There's this kind of flailing in the water phase that you just have to try everything and see what works for you. And then it's just time. After that, you kind of get to know what's working for you, what you don't like, what you can't stand, and what you do like.
Really good advice. And it's really good. So I had one more question for you. So when you were beginning writing these stories, you've written a lot of series. What was the aspect of you writing, the story in its inception that had you say that this needs to be a series?
I think that for Book of Theo, it was always considered a series. And then by the time, and that wasn't about marketing or anything. I think that was just how I thought of it. And then by the time I got to Riders of Jade and Fire, I had much more of a business hat on, where I was thinking, no, this does need to be a series, because it needs to continue. But the other thing too is it gives you a lot more time to explore a world, I think.
Yeah.
That's fun, because it gives you so much more time to play. Otherwise you've kind of created all of these characters in this world and this setting and these dragons, and then you set them aside and go on to another book. It just feels it feels like you've done a lot of prep work, for a very short space of time. So I think with these worlds, I find them very fascinating. I find they definitely support 3 to 4 books, if not more. I'll see how I feel at the end of it. But yeah, I think it's fun to be in series, because I think that if you've created characters that you love, you'll like being with them for more than one book.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that gave me like another question I wanted to ask. Is there like something that a lot of authors struggle when it comes to writing their characters and they have to go through difficult moments? Was it hard to put your characters through difficult moments, especially in that series aspect?
It's hard to come up with challenges that were big enough in a way. I'm always, especially in screenwriting, you're always thinking of, well, what's the worst thing that can happen to them?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you want to do. You just want to come up with what's the worst possible thing that can happen, in their world. What do they pray never happens, and that's kind of what you want to put on them. So I don't think it's necessarily hard. It's hard to write yourself out of those
Okay.
because you've put them in a really bad situation, and now you've got
Yeah.
to think of a way of how they, outsmart the villain, or like they get out of this impossible situation that you've put them
Yeah.
in, right? Like
Yeah.
that part of it's really tricky. But in terms of just plunging them in there, like
Hmm.
it's kind of, you just have to do it. And I almost do it to the point where I just plunge them into the situation, because I figure, well, I'm not actually, that's the great thing about being a writer. You plunge them into the situation, you figure it out, maybe not today, but you figure it out tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And so you just put them in there. Now I know, okay, I've made the worst thing happen to them, and now at some point I'll figure out, how to get them out of it. But I have
Yeah.
to put them in the worst situation.
Oh, that's amazing. What kind of like tools have you used like to get them out of that situation, and how do you handle writer's block?
I think writer's block is purely, yeah, I find I get through writer's block just by writing.
Okay.
And just, and by writing anything.
Hmm.
You just go through possible scenarios, and you write it, and you think, okay, well, because the other freeing thing is like, whatever you write, it doesn't have to go in the final book. You can erase all of it if you want,
Hmm.
right? So,
Yeah.
so all right, Jin's in a burning building. It's like, all right, what happens if Jin's in a burning building? Okay, she's gonna look for exits, and let's look for exits, and then that doesn't seem well. Actually, isn't there a water dragon outside? Let's get the water dragon to like blow some water on the thing. Okay, so now she's got to like go and and things just come to you. I find that things come to me as soon as I move my fingers. As soon as I have my fingers moving over the keyboard, then things move. But if I don't, then yeah, it's very easy to just sit there with Jin in a burning room and not do anything.
It's always like great to see and like fascinating to see like how different people like deal with like writer's block and everything like that.
What do you
Because
do?
me, the worst it's been is like 3 months.
No.
Like I don't think I have a process. I just I just struggle to get through it. I'll I'll let you know when I figure it out.
Do. I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Yeah. I don't have a process. I just like it hits and I'm just kind of like, oh.
Yeah, but maybe your process is the 3 months process.
That was like the worst period though. I literally couldn't write. But you were right. Like just start writing, like even if it's like a sentence a day.
Yeah.
Literally just
I
helps.
just it'll come to you as you try to figure it out. It'll just come to you, even if it's just dialogue. I find a lot of the times I fall into two people talking, and I realize that they're just actually talking out my thoughts, but
Yeah.
that in itself helps,
Hmm.
because then you can reject something. Oh, that doesn't work, or this does work, or that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that. And then you keep going.
Actually, that must be like a really great advantage to have as like working as a screenwriter, because you deal with dialogue a lot, and then like as an author, you make it sound more believable, I guess.
Hmm.
'Cause, like I find working with dialogue really like difficult, to make sure that it sounds not robotic but real.
Right.
Um, but I guess like when you're having a normal conversation, it there's a lot of like pauses and different things that you do that maybe the actor will do in like a
Mhm.
film setting, whereas like in writing you really can't be like she paused or
The
something like
nas.
because of word count, and
Yes, that's right.
the flow of conversation, so sometimes it just ends up looking robotic or not real, so
Mhm.
that must be like a real good advantage to have.
It is, and also I think you can always do passes over that as well. That's something that you can always, once you get it down on paper and you come back and look at it, you can sort of then look at it and say, okay, how do I make this less robotic, or how do I make this, a little more real?
So where can our listeners connect with you?
So my website is just my name, melanieansley.com. You can find me there. I'm also on Facebook, and I'm not really on X at the moment, but those are the best places to connect with me. You can also subscribe to my newsletter on my website.
Okay. So thank you very much for coming and answering a few questions with us. We really enjoyed you authored on the Author Spotlight series. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.